The coffee cup trembled in his hand before he even realized why. The Reykjavik account was never closed, she said quietly, as if she were commenting on the weather. Ethan Caldwell froze mid-sip, his $1,200 suit catching the soft light of the Manhattan restaurant while the world around him kept moving. Plates clinked. A waiter passed by with a tray of steaks. Outside the window, yellow cabs slid through the late afternoon traffic on Fifth Avenue. But at table 12, everything stopped. He lowered the cup slowly and looked at her for the first time. Really looked. Claire Bennett stood beside the table in a simple black apron and white button-up, her blonde hair tied back neatly, her posture calm. Almost too calm for someone who had just said something that should not exist outside a sealed file. "That's a strange thing to say to a guest," Ethan replied, his voice even, controlled, the same tone he used in boardrooms when millions of dollars were on the line. Claire met his gaze without hesitation. "I thought you preferred honesty with your coffee." A flicker of irritation crossed his face, but it vanished just as quickly. He set the cup down with precision, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the saucer. Most people in this city knew his name. They knew his company. They knew better than to play games with him. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. Claire did not move. "I'm working, Mr. Caldwell." "Then consider this part of your shift," he replied, pulling a black credit card from his wallet and placing it on the table like a quiet threat. The gesture was deliberate. It always worked. Money opened doors. Money created silence. Money erased problems. Claire glanced at the card, then back at him. "I don't think this is a transaction you can swipe," she said. For the first time, Ethan felt something shift. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He leaned back slightly, studying her the way he would study a competitor. "You're either very brave or very careless," he said. Claire reached forward and adjusted the position of his coffee cup by half an inch, aligning it with the table's edge. The movement was subtle but intentional. "Neither," she replied, just informed. The word hung in the air between them. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had spent 15 years building a life where information was currency and control was absolute. Nothing slipped through his system. Nothing reached him without purpose. Yet here she was, a waitress in a midtown restaurant, speaking about a detail buried deep inside a deal that had never officially existed. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked, his voice lower now, sharper. Claire picked up the small silver creamer and poured a measured stream into his cup, her hands steady. "I didn't hear it," she said. "I saw it." Ethan's eyes narrowed. That account was handled offshore, through layers of legal protection designed by the best attorneys in the country. Even his own executives did not have full visibility. "You're making a mistake," he said. Claire set the creamer down and finally stepped back, giving him space. "Am I?" she asked softly. A couple at the next table laughed over a shared dessert. A server dropped a fork somewhere behind them. The normal world continued, untouched by the tension building at table 12. Ethan reached for his phone, then stopped himself. Calling someone now would show weakness. He did not do that. Instead, he folded his hands together on the table and looked at her with renewed focus. "Who are you, Claire Bennett?" he asked. Claire held his gaze for a long second, then gave a small, almost polite smile. "That depends on which version of your records you believe," she said. Ethan felt the ground beneath his control shift just slightly again. Records. Plural. That was not a word someone guessed. That was a word someone knew. And for the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell realized there might be a file in his world that he had never seen. Claire did not wait for his permission this time. She pulled out the chair and sat down across from him, folding her hands neatly on the table as if she belonged there. Ethan watched the movement carefully. The shift was subtle but undeniable. A few seconds ago, she was staff. Now she was something else entirely. "You are stepping into dangerous territory," he said. Claire nodded once. "So are you." He reached into his jacket and placed his phone face down on the table, then slid it slightly toward her. The screen lit up for a moment with a notification before going dark again. "That account does not exist in any system you can access," he said. Claire glanced at the phone but did not touch it. "It exists in at least 3, she replied. One in Luxembourg. One in Reykjavik. One that was supposed to be deleted but was archived instead." Ethan felt a tightening in his chest. He masked it by reaching for his coffee again, but this time he did not drink. "You are guessing," he said. Claire shook her head gently. "I do not guess with numbers like that." A server passed by and refilled a water glass at the next table. The normal rhythm of the restaurant pressed in around them, but the air between them had shifted. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Show me something real," he said. Claire reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a folded receipt. It looked ordinary at first glance. White paper, slightly creased, the kind handed out at any register in the city. She placed it on the table and slid it toward him. Ethan hesitated, then picked it up. His eyes moved quickly across the printed lines. 2 coffees. 1 club sandwich. Sales tax. Total. Then his gaze stopped. At the bottom, beneath the standard print, was a string of numbers that did not belong. 8 digits. A timestamp. And a reference code he had not seen in nearly a decade. He looked up sharply. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Claire rested her hands on the table. "It was printed here this morning," she said. "That is impossible. The system that generates those codes was shut down years ago." Claire tilted her head slightly. "That is what you were told." Ethan turned the receipt over, then back again, as if it might change. The ink was fresh. The paper was warm from her hand. This was not a copy. This was not a trick. This was current. He placed the receipt down carefully. "Who else has seen this?" he asked. Claire did not answer right away. She picked up his coffee cup and moved it an inch closer to him, aligning it again with precise care. The same gesture as before. Controlled. Intentional. "Enough people to make it matter," she said finally. Ethan's jaw tightened. His mind was already moving through scenarios, tracing connections, identifying risks. This was no longer a curiosity. This was exposure. "You walked into the wrong room. With the wrong information," he said. Claire met his gaze without flinching. "No," she replied. "I walked into the exact room I was supposed to." The confidence in her voice landed heavier than any threat. Ethan leaned back, studying her again. The uniform, the posture, the restraint. None of it matched the data in front of him. "You are not just a waitress," he said. Claire gave a small, almost tired smile. "That depends on who is asking." He exhaled slowly, then made a decision. He picked up his phone and unlocked it, his thumb moving quickly across the screen. Names appeared. Contacts who could shut things down, fix things, erase things. He hovered for a second, then looked up at her. "Last chance," he said. "Tell me what you want." Claire watched him, then slowly reached into her apron again. This time, she pulled out a second item. A thin envelope, cream-colored, unmarked. She placed it on the table between them. "I want you to read this before you make that call," she said. Ethan stared at the envelope. Something about it felt heavier than it should. He did not reach for it immediately. Instead, he looked back at her. "What is this?" he asked. Claire stood up from the chair, smoothing the front of her apron as if the conversation had already ended. "It is the part you never saw," she said. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the envelope untouched on the table as Ethan slowly reached for it, already knowing that whatever was inside would change the rules of the game. Ethan did not open the envelope right away. He held it in his hand, feeling the weight of the paper, the faint texture under his thumb, as if it could tell him something before he even looked inside. Across the room, Claire had already returned to another table, taking an order from a couple who seemed entirely unaware that anything unusual had just happened. She moved the same way she had before. Calm, precise, invisible. Ethan slid a finger under the flap and opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single photograph and a folded document. He pulled out the photograph first. It was older, slightly faded. Taken in a conference room, he recognized instantly. Glass walls, midtown skyline in the background. A younger version of himself stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, pointing at a projection screen. Around him sat a group of analysts. He studied the faces. Most were familiar. Some had left the firm years ago. Then his eyes stopped on one person near the corner of the table. A woman, blonde hair tied back, focused, quiet. He felt something shift again. He unfolded the document. It was a termination report. Official letterhead. Caldwell Capital. The date was 10 years ago. The name at the top read Claire Bennett. Reason for termination. Breach of protocol. Unauthorized access to restricted financial records. Ethan's grip tightened slightly. That was not how he remembered it. He looked up from the paper and searched the room until he found her again. Claire was placing a check on another table, her posture unchanged, her expression composed. He stood up. The chair legs scraped softly against the polished floor. A few heads turned, then quickly turned back. He walked toward her, the photograph and document in his hand. "Claire," he said. She turned before he reached her, as if she had been expecting him. "You found it faster than I thought," she replied. He held up the paper. "This is incomplete," he said. Claire tilted her head slightly. "Is it? You accessed files you were not cleared to see. That is what this says." "That is what you signed," she corrected gently. Ethan's jaw tightened. The memory was there now, clearer than before. A junior analyst flagged for crossing lines. A decision made quickly, efficiently, cleanly. "You broke policy," he said. Claire stepped a little closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I reported an irregularity," she said. "You buried it." The words landed with a weight that did not match her tone. Ethan glanced at the photograph again. He remembered that meeting. The urgency, the pressure from investors, the need to close the deal before the quarter ended. There had been a problem. Something flagged. Something inconvenient. "We resolved it," he said. Claire shook her head once. "You erased it," she replied. A server passed between them carrying a tray of iced teas. The moment stretched but did not break. Ethan looked back at the document. Breach of protocol. It was a convenient phrase. It always had been. "Why come back now?" he asked. Claire studied him for a second, then reached into her apron and pulled out something new. A small key card. Plain. White. With a printed label. She placed it in his hand. "Because it is not finished," she said. Ethan looked down at the card. The label read Storage Unit 314. Queens. His eyes lifted slowly. "What is in there?" he asked. Claire met his gaze, her expression steady but no longer distant. "The part of the file you made disappear," she said. Ethan felt the ground shift again, this time deeper. He closed his hand around the key card. "You kept evidence for 10 years, he said. Claire's voice softened just slightly. "I kept the truth," she replied. A silence passed between them, heavier than anything before. Ethan glanced back at his table, where the receipt and the empty envelope still lay beside the untouched coffee. When he looked back at her, something in his expression had changed. Less certainty, more calculation. "If what you are saying is real," he said, "this does not just affect me." Claire nodded. "I know. That is why you are going to open that door yourself," she said. Ethan held the key card, feeling its edges press into his palm. Then he looked at her one more time. "And if I do not?" he asked. Claire's answer came without hesitation. "Then someone else will," she said. "And they will not give you the same courtesy." Ethan did not say another word. He grabbed his coat, left a stack of bills on the table without counting, and walked out of the restaurant with the key card still pressed in his palm. The late afternoon air in Manhattan felt colder than it should. Traffic noise filled the street, but it barely registered. He stepped into a black town car waiting at the curb and gave a single instruction. "Queens. Storage facility. No stops." The driver nodded and pulled into traffic. Ethan sat back, staring at the key card, replaying every detail from the last 20 minutes. 10 years. If Claire had held on to something for 10 years, it was not a bluff. The car exited the Queensboro Bridge and turned into an industrial block lined with warehouses and storage units. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The place smelled faintly of dust and metal. Ethan stepped out, the sound of his shoes echoing against the concrete as he walked down a narrow corridor marked with numbered doors. 310, 311, 312. He slowed. When he saw 314, the door was plain, gray, unremarkable. He pulled the key card from his pocket and hesitated for half a second. Then he swiped it. The lock clicked. He pushed the door open. Inside, the unit was small, about 10 by 10 feet. A single metal shelf stood against the back wall. On it sat a locked file box and an old laptop. No decoration, no clutter, just two objects placed with intention. Ethan stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The silence was immediate. He walked to the shelf and lifted the file box. It was heavier than it looked. He set it down on the floor and examined the lock. No combination, just a simple latch. It opened easily. Inside were neatly organized folders, each labeled dates, account numbers, internal memos. His eyes moved quickly, scanning, recognizing formats and codes that had not been used in years. Then he stopped. One folder was marked Reykjavik. He pulled it out and opened it. Inside was a printed ledger. Clean, detailed, transactions that had never appeared in any official report. Amounts that would have triggered audits instantly if they had been visible. His pulse slowed, not from calm, but from focus. This was real. This was traceable. This was dangerous. He flipped to the last page. At the bottom was a signature line. His name. But the signature was not his. It was close. Close enough to pass a quick glance. Not close enough to survive scrutiny. Ethan straightened slightly. That changed everything. He reached for the old laptop next. It powered on after a few seconds, the screen flickering before settling into a basic login interface. No password prompt. Just a single folder on the desktop labeled Archive. He opened it. Dozens of files appeared. Emails. Scans. Audio logs. He clicked on one at random. A recording began to play. His own voice filled the small room. We move forward. We do not escalate. Close it quietly. Ethan froze. He remembered that meeting. He remembered saying those words. But the recording did not stop there. Another voice followed. Claire's voice. Younger. Firm. This will come back. You cannot bury this without consequences. There was a pause. Then his voice again. That will not be your concern anymore. The recording ended. Ethan stood in the quiet, the weight of the evidence settling in around him. This was not just a hidden file. This was a timeline, a record of decisions, a record of intent. He reached into the box again and pulled out one more item. A sealed envelope, different from the one in the restaurant. Thicker. Official. He opened it carefully. Inside was a notarized document. Date stamped from 2 weeks ago. Statement of disclosure. Prepared but not yet filed. His name appeared again. Not as a victim. Not as a witness. As the responsible party. Ethan exhaled slowly, folding the paper with precise care. His control was no longer absolute. It was conditional, and someone else now held the conditions. He pulled out his phone and stared at the contact list. This time, he did not hesitate. He dialed a number. When the line connected, he spoke clearly. I need everything we have on Claire Bennett. Every record. Every alias. Everything. There was a pause on the other end. Then a response. Already sent to your email 10 minutes ago. Ethan's expression shifted slightly. He had been ahead of everyone for years. Now someone was ahead of him. He ended the call and looked back at the laptop screen, where one final file remained unopened. The file name was simple. Caldwell_final. He stared at it for a long second before moving the cursor toward it, knowing that whatever was inside would not just expose the past, it would decide what happened next. Ethan hovered over the file name for a long second, then clicked. The screen shifted instantly. A video opened, grainy at first, then clear enough to recognize the room. It was not a boardroom. It was smaller, private, a conference suite he had used for off-record discussions years ago. The timestamp in the corner read 11 years ago, not 10. Ethan leaned closer to the screen. The camera angle was fixed, likely from a ceiling unit. He saw himself again, younger, sharper, less cautious. Across the table sat two men he recognized immediately. One was a foreign investor tied to the Reykjavik account. The other was his own former legal advisor, Daniel Brooks. The audio crackled, then stabilized. The investor spoke first. We proceed as agreed. No delays. Ethan on the screen nodded. We proceed quietly. No audit trail. Then Daniel's voice cut in. We need a signature on record, even if it is not official. Ethan watched his past self. Pause. Just for a moment. Then he said it. Make it look clean. That line landed harder than anything before. Ethan's jaw tightened. He remembered the pressure, the timelines, the expectations. But seeing it now, recorded, preserved, stripped of context, it did not look like strategy. It looked like intent. The video continued. Papers were passed across the table. The investor signed first. Daniel followed. Then the camera caught something Ethan had not expected. A fourth person in the room. Not seated. Standing near the wall. Quiet. Observing. Claire. Younger. Holding a tablet. Not speaking. Not interrupting. Just watching. Ethan leaned back slowly. That detail had never been in his memory. The video ended abruptly. The screen returned to the file list. Ethan stood still for a moment, then reached for his phone again. This time, he did not call a fixer. He called someone he had not spoken to in years. Daniel Brooks. The line rang twice before connecting. Ethan, that is unexpected, Daniel said, his voice cautious but composed. Ethan did not waste time. You were in that room, he said. A pause followed. Then Daniel replied carefully. I have been in many rooms with you. Do not play that game. Reykjavik. 11 years ago. Another pause. Longer this time. Daniel exhaled on the other end. Where did you get that? He asked. Ethan's eyes flicked back to the laptop screen. That is not your concern right now. What is my concern, Daniel said, his tone tightening, is why you are bringing this up after all this time. Ethan stepped closer to the shelf, the file box still open at his feet. Because it was never closed, he said. Silence answered him for a second. Then Daniel spoke again, lower now. If that file is active again, you are not the only one exposed. Ethan let that settle. That was new. Shared risk changed the board. Good, Ethan replied. Then we are aligned. Daniel did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice had lost some of its polish. What do you want? Ethan glanced at the notarized document again. At his name. At the language that framed him as the central figure. I want to know who else has access, he said. Daniel hesitated. Then he said something that shifted everything again. It is not who else. It is how many. Ethan's grip tightened around the phone. Explain. Daniel lowered his voice further. That archive was duplicated. We did not keep just one copy. We could not afford to. There were 3. Ethan felt a cold clarity settle in. 3 copies meant 3 points of failure. 3 sources of leverage. Where are they, he asked. Daniel exhaled slowly. 1 was destroyed. Officially. 1 was held in escrow. And the 3rd, Daniel paused, then finished. The 3rd was assigned to internal oversight. Ethan's eyes moved slowly back to the laptop screen. Claire had said she kept the truth. Not all of it. Just enough. Who handled internal oversight? Ethan asked, already knowing the answer before it came. Daniel's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Claire Bennett. The line went quiet. Ethan ended the call without another word. He looked at the screen again. The video file. The archive. The evidence. Then he looked at the empty doorway of the storage unit, as if expecting someone to be standing there. No one was. Not yet. But the realization settled in with precision. Claire had not just preserved the past. She had positioned herself at the center of it. And if there were still 2 other copies out there, then this was no longer about what he had done. It was about who would control what happened next. Ethan closed the laptop slowly, not because he was finished, but because he understood something had shifted. For the first time since this began, he was not reacting. He was thinking ahead. He placed the laptop back on the shelf, then took out his phone and opened the email that had arrived earlier. The subject line was simple. Claire Bennett. Full profile. He tapped it. The file opened into a detailed report, far more extensive than he expected. Employment history. Education. Gaps. There were years missing. Entire stretches of time marked as unavailable. That alone told him more than any complete record would have. He scrolled further. A photograph appeared. Claire in a courtroom. Not as a defendant. Not as a witness. Sitting behind a legal team. The date was 5 years ago. The case name was redacted, but Ethan recognized the firm listed on the document. It was one of the few firms in the country that specialized in internal corporate oversight. His eyes narrowed slightly. She did not disappear after he terminated her. She moved sideways. Quietly. Strategically. Ethan exhaled. Once, then dialed another number. This time, the call connected almost immediately. A woman answered. Caldwell Investigations, how can I help you? I need a location trace, Ethan said. Name. Claire Bennett. The woman paused for a second. That name is flagged, she replied. Ethan's expression did not change, but something sharpened in his tone. Flagged how? The woman hesitated. Restricted access. Internal request. Ethan stepped out of the storage unit and into the corridor, the hum of the overhead lights returning around him. Who placed the restriction? He asked. Another pause. Then the answer came. You did, sir. Ethan stopped walking. For a brief second, the world narrowed to a single point. That is not possible, he said. The woman on the line sounded certain. The authorization code matches your credentials from 3 years ago. Ethan's mind moved quickly. 3 years ago, he had authorized dozens of restrictions. Hundreds, even. But this one felt different. He ended the call without another word and looked back at the storage unit door. Claire had not just prepared evidence. She had anticipated his moves, limited his access, redirected his reach. He stepped back inside and picked up the photograph again, the one from the conference room. He studied Claire's position in the frame. Not just present, positioned, close enough to hear everything, far enough to be overlooked. He flipped the photo over. There was writing on the back. Small, precise. A time, 3:17 p.m. And a location, West 46th Street. Ethan frowned slightly. That was not this storage unit. That was Midtown, close to the restaurant. He checked his watch. It was 3:02 p.m., 17 minutes. The timing was not accidental. He grabbed the key card, the photograph, and his code in one motion and headed out. The corridor lights flickered as he moved quickly toward the exit. Outside, the air felt sharper. The city noise louder. He stepped into the waiting car and gave a new instruction. West 46th Street. Now. The driver did not ask questions. Traffic parted slowly as they moved back toward Manhattan. Ethan sat forward this time, the photograph in his hand, the numbers on the back repeating in his mind. Claire had controlled the past. She had restricted the present. Now she was setting the next move. The car turned onto West 46th Street and slowed. Ethan looked out the window. Restaurants. Office buildings. Pedestrians moving. In late afternoon rhythm. Then he saw it. A small café on the corner. Familiar. Too familiar. It was where this had started. The car stopped. Ethan stepped out without waiting. He checked his watch again. 3:16 p.m. 1 minute. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The bell above the door rang softly. The room looked the same. Same tables. Same light. Same quiet conversations. But Claire was not behind the counter. She was sitting at a table near the window, waiting. In front of her sat 2 coffee cups. One for her. One for him. Ethan approached slowly, every step measured. You planned this, he said as he reached the table. Claire looked up at him, her expression calm but no longer distant. No, she replied. I timed it. Ethan glanced at the second cup, still untouched, steam rising gently into the air. Then he looked back at her. And what happens at 3:17, he asked. Claire's eyes held his for a long second. Then she spoke. At 3:17, you decide whether this stays between us or becomes something much bigger. The second hand on Ethan's watch clicked forward. 3:17 p.m. The sound felt louder than the entire cafe. He did not sit immediately. Instead, he remained standing for a moment, studying Claire, the 2 cups of coffee between them, the way she had positioned everything down to the inch. Then he pulled out the chair and sat. You set a deadline, he said. Claire nodded once. Deadlines clarify priorities. Ethan glanced around the room. A barista called out an order. Someone laughed near the counter. Nothing about this place suggested what was actually happening. You said this could stay between us, he continued. That means you have already prepared for it not to. Claire reached for her cup and took a small sip, her eyes never leaving his. Of course, she said. Ethan leaned back slightly. Then let us stop pretending this is about truth, he said. This is leverage. Claire did not react immediately. She set her cup down with care. Leverage is just truth with timing, she replied. That answer would have unsettled him an hour ago. Now it sharpened his focus. He reached into his coat and placed the photograph from the storage unit on the table, sliding it toward her. You were in that room, he said. Claire glanced down at the image, then back up. Yes. Not as an analyst, he added. You were observing. Documenting. Claire gave a small nod. That was the assignment. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. Assigned by who? Claire held his gaze. Internal oversight. The same department that signed off on your restriction order 3 years ago. Ethan felt the pieces begin to align in a new way. You said I placed that restriction, he said slowly. Claire tilted her head. You did, but you did not know what it would protect. That shifted the ground again. Ethan leaned forward now, his voice lower, more precise. You embedded yourself into my system, he said. You turned my own authority into a shield for yourself. Claire did not deny it. I made sure the right doors stayed closed, she said, and the right ones stayed open. Ethan let out a quiet breath. That was not just preparation. That was architecture. You have been building this for years, he said. Claire's expression softened slightly, but not with regret. With certainty. I have been preserving it, she corrected. Ethan tapped the edge of the photograph once, a small, controlled movement. Then why now, he asked. Why today? Claire reached into her bag this time, not her apron. That was new. She pulled out a tablet and placed it on the table between them, turning the screen toward him. A live news feed filled the display. Financial networks. Breaking headline banner moving across the bottom. Ethan's company name appeared in bold letters. He felt his focus sharpen instantly. What is this, he asked. Claire did not answer right away. She tapped the screen once. The feed shifted to a preloaded segment, paused at the start. Timestamp. Scheduled release. 3:30 p.m. In 13 minutes. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. What am I looking at? Claire's voice remained calm, but there was a new weight to it. External audit request. Filed this morning. Anonymous source. Ethan's eyes flicked back to her. Anonymous. Claire held his gaze. For now, that was the shift. Not just private leverage. Public exposure. Ethan leaned back, processing quickly. If that audit went live, it would not just raise questions. It would trigger investigations. Boards, regulators, investors. The kind of attention that could not be controlled once it started. You are not just threatening me, he said. You are setting this in motion. Claire shook her head slightly. It is. Already in motion, she said. I am giving you a window. Ethan looked at the timer on the screen. 13 minutes had become 12. Then 11. His mind moved through options. Legal blocks. Media influence. Internal containment. All possible. None immediate enough to stop a scheduled release already queued. You said I decide what happens next, he said. Claire nodded. You do. Ethan leaned forward again, his voice steady, but different now. Less defensive. More deliberate. And if I choose to open everything myself, he asked. Claire watched him closely. Then you control how the story begins, she said. Ethan let that sit. Control had not disappeared. It had changed shape. He reached for the tablet, his fingers hovering over the paused segment. Then he looked back at her. You have one copy, he said. There are 2 others. Claire's eyes did not move. Yes. Ethan gave a slight nod. Then this is not your endgame, he said. It is the opening move. Claire's expression shifted just slightly. Not surprise. Recognition. Ethan saw it. For the first time, he was no longer catching up. He was stepping into the same rhythm. He leaned back and picked up the second coffee cup, finally taking a sip. It had cooled slightly, but he did not react. Then tell me something real, he said. Who else is playing this game? Claire held his gaze for a long second. Then she answered. You already met one of them. Ethan's grip on the cup tightened just enough to matter. When he asked, Claire's voice remained steady. At the table where this started, she said. And suddenly, Ethan realized this was never just about her. The cafe door opened again, and this time Ethan noticed. A man stepped inside wearing a navy overcoat, mid-40s, clean cut, the kind of presence that blended into a financial district without ever drawing attention. He did not look around. He walked straight to the counter, ordered a black coffee, and paid in cash. Ethan's eyes followed him for just a second, then returned to Claire. That is him, Ethan said quietly. Claire did not turn. Yes. Ethan leaned back slightly, studying the man's reflection in the window instead of looking directly. He has been here before, Ethan added. Claire nodded once. Twice this week. The detail landed with precision. This was not coincidence. This was positioning. Ethan tapped the side of his cup lightly, a controlled rhythm. You said I met one of them, he said. That implies more than one. Claire took another sip of her coffee, unhurried. It always does, she replied. Ethan allowed a faint, almost amused breath to escape. You are very confident for someone sitting in the middle of this, he said. Claire set her cup down. Confidence is just preparation that has been tested, she said. Ethan's gaze shifted again toward the man at the counter. He had taken his coffee and moved to a table near the back, placing a folded newspaper beside him. The headline was visible from where Ethan sat. Markets react to pending audit inquiry. The timing was exact. The article had not even been public 15 minutes ago. Ethan's phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced down. 3 missed calls. 2 board members. 1 from his chief legal officer. The pressure had arrived. Right on schedule. He silenced the phone and placed it face down. You coordinated the timing with media release, he said. Claire shook her head slightly. Not coordinated. Anticipated. Ethan nodded slowly. That was more dangerous. Anticipation meant she understood the system deeply enough to predict it. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. You are not working alone, he said. Claire met his gaze without hesitation. No one does, she replied. Ethan let the silence stretch for a moment, then reached into his coat and pulled out his own phone again. This time, he opened a different application. Secure. Encrypted. He typed quickly, then turned the screen slightly away from her. A message sent. Claire watched the movement, her expression unchanged, but her eyes sharpened just slightly. That was new. You were still holding something back, she said. Ethan looked up, calm, composed, but no longer reacting. Of course I am, he replied. Claire leaned back slightly, studying him now with the same precision he had used earlier. That is risky, she said. Ethan shook his head once. No, that is balance. Across the room, the man in the navy coat unfolded his newspaper, but his eyes flicked up for a fraction of a second, just enough to confirm awareness. Ethan caught it. That was not passive observation. That was active monitoring. He picked up his coffee again and took another sip, slower this time. You built a system to expose me, he said. Claire did not correct him. Ethan continued. But systems have blind spots. Claire's eyes narrowed just slightly. Only if the person inside them misses something, she replied. Ethan gave a faint nod. Then let us test that, he said. His phone buzzed again. This time, he did not ignore it. He looked down at the screen. A single message. Sent. Delivered. Confirmed. He locked the phone and placed it on the table. Claire watched him carefully now. The balance had shifted again, not fully, but enough to matter. What did you just do? She asked. Ethan met her gaze, steady, controlled. I made sure I am not the only one walking into the next move blind, he said. Claire held his eyes for a long second, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That was acknowledgement, not agreement. Across the room, the man in the navy coat folded his newspaper and stood up, leaving cash on the table. He walked toward the door without looking back. As he passed their table, he slowed just enough to speak, his voice low but clear. You are running out of time, Mr. Caldwell. Then he stepped outside and disappeared into the street. Ethan did not turn to watch him go. He kept his focus on Claire. That was not your line, he said. Claire shook her head slightly. No, that was not mine. Ethan's phone vibrated once more. He picked it up, expecting another call, but this time it was an alert. A new file had just been uploaded to a secure channel he had not accessed in years. The file name appeared on the screen. Reykjavik_override. Ethan's expression changed just enough to register. He looked back at Claire, then at the door, then at the phone again. And for the first time since this began, he realized someone else had just made a move neither of them had planned. Ethan did not open the new file immediately. He held the phone in his hand, letting the notification sit there like a piece on a chessboard he had not yet touched. Across from him, Claire watched, her expression steady but no longer fully in control of the rhythm. That was the first shift. Small but real. You did not expect that, Ethan said quietly. Claire did not answer right away. Her eyes moved briefly to his phone, then back to his face. No, she admitted. That was not part of my timing. Ethan gave a slight nod. Good. Then we are both working with incomplete information now. He set the phone down on the table, screen still locked, deliberately not opening the file. That choice was visible. Intentional. Claire noticed it. You are not going to check it, she said. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed but precise. Not yet, he replied. Why not? Because whoever sent it wants me to react. Ethan tapped the edge of the table once. I prefer to understand the move before I answer it. Claire studied him more carefully now. The balance had shifted again, not toward him completely, but away from her certainty. The timer on the tablet continued counting down in the corner of the screen. 8 minutes until the scheduled release. The pressure had not eased. It had multiplied. Ethan reached into his coat again and pulled out the folded receipt from earlier, the one with the embedded code. He placed it beside the tablet. This was your first signal, he said. Then the storage unit. Then the meeting. Claire nodded slightly. A sequence. Controlled. Predictable. Ethan continued. But this file, he tapped his phone lightly. This does not follow your sequence. Claire's gaze sharpened. No, she said. It does not. Ethan leaned forward now, lowering his voice just enough to separate their conversation from the rest of the room. That means someone else is not just watching. They are intervening. Claire did not deny it. Across the café, the empty table where the man in the navy coat had been sitting remained untouched, the folded newspaper still there. Ethan glanced at it briefly, then back at Claire. He left that on purpose, Ethan said. Claire followed his gaze. Yes. Ethan stood up slowly, took 2 steps, and picked up the newspaper. He returned to the table and placed it between them. The headline was the same, but there was a handwritten note in the margin now. It had not been there before. Claire's eyes moved to it. The ink was fresh. 3 words. Check the timestamp. Ethan looked at her. That is not your handwriting, he said. Claire shook her head. No. Ethan turned the newspaper slightly, aligning it with the tablet and the receipt, creating a line of objects on the table. Each one a signal. Each one a piece. Of a system that was no longer fully hers. He unlocked his phone, but still did not open the file. Instead, He checked the time on the notification. The file had been uploaded exactly 1 minute after the man in the navy coat left the cafe. Precise. Coordinated. Ethan exhaled slowly. That was not random. He looked back at Claire. Your oversight system had 3 copies, he said. 1 destroyed. 1 in escrow. 1 with you. Claire nodded. That was correct. Ethan tapped the newspaper lightly. Then someone else just created a 4th point, he said. Claire's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough to matter. That was not supposed to happen. Ethan saw it. That was the opening he needed. He picked up his coffee again and finished it this time, setting the empty cup down with a soft, deliberate sound. The steam was gone. The moment had cooled. You built this to control exposure, he said. But now exposure has its own momentum. Claire did not argue. She was recalculating. Ethan leaned forward one more time, his voice steady, grounded, no longer reactive. I'm going to let this play out for a few more minutes, he said. Claire's eyes lifted to meet his. That is a risk. Ethan gave a slight nod. Yes, but it is also how you see who moves next. He picked up his phone again, his thumb hovering over the new file. Then he looked back at her. And when I open this, he added, I will not just be reacting to you anymore. Claire held his gaze, the tension between them sharper now, more balanced, less predictable. The timer on the tablet dropped to 5 minutes. The cafe noise continued around them, unchanged, indifferent. Ethan finally tapped the screen. The file began to open, and as the first frame loaded, he realized this was not evidence from the past. It was a message sent in real time. The screen flickered once, then stabilized into a live video feed. Not recorded, not archived, live. Ethan's eyes sharpened instantly as he leaned closer, his posture tightening with controlled precision. The image showed a conference room, not in the past, but now. Bright lighting, glass walls. A digital clock on the wall confirmed the time. 3:25 p.m., 5 minutes before the scheduled release. Claire's gaze moved to the screen, and for the first time since this began, something shifted in her expression that was not calculation. It was recognition. Ethan caught it. You know this room, he said. Claire did not answer immediately. The camera angle shifted slightly, revealing more of the space. Then a figure stepped into view. Daniel Brooks. His former legal advisor adjusted his tie and placed a folder on the table. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened just enough to matter. That is not possible, Claire said under her breath. Ethan turned his head slightly toward her. That is twice you have said that today, he replied. The feed continued. Daniel sat down, opened the folder, and began arranging documents with deliberate care. Then another person entered the frame. A woman Ethan did not recognize immediately. Mid-40s. Sharp posture. Federal badge clipped at her waist. Ethan's focus sharpened further. Claire leaned forward now, her voice lower. That is a regulator, she said. Ethan nodded once. Yes, and she is early. The woman sat across from Daniel, her expression composed, professional, but direct. She placed a recorder on the table and pressed a button. The red light blinked on. Ethan felt the implications settle in. This was not an audit request anymore. This was an active inquiry. He looked back at Claire. Your timeline just moved, he said. Claire's eyes remained on the screen. Someone accelerated it, she replied. Ethan's phone vibrated again, but he ignored it. The video feed was more important now. Daniel began speaking, his voice clear enough through the device's audio. We are prepared to cooperate fully. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. That was not Daniel's usual approach. He did not cooperate. He contained. He redirected. Unless he was protecting himself first. The regulator nodded and opened her own folder. We will begin with Reykjavik, she said. The word landed like a marker on the board. Ethan leaned back slightly, processing faster now. This was not just exposure. This was a race. Whoever controlled the narrative in the next 5 minutes would define everything that followed. He looked at Claire again. You did not trigger this, he said. Claire shook her head once. No, but someone used what I set in motion, she replied. Ethan nodded slowly. That was the difference. She had built the system. Someone else had decided to activate it. He reached for the tablet and glanced at the countdown. 3 minutes. Then he looked back. At the live feed, Daniel slid a document across the table toward the regulator. Ethan leaned forward again, his eyes narrowing. He recognized the format instantly. It was a disclosure agreement. Partial. Controlled. Carefully framed. Daniel was not confessing. He was negotiating. Ethan allowed a faint, almost imperceptible shift in his expression. That was familiar territory. That was something he understood. He looked back at Claire. He is not exposing everything, Ethan said. Claire followed his gaze to the screen. No, he is choosing what survives, she replied. Ethan nodded once. Exactly. That was the opening. He picked up his phone again and finally spoke with quiet clarity. Then I do not need to stop this, he said. Claire turned to him, her eyes searching his face. What are you going to do? She asked. Ethan met her gaze, steady, controlled, no longer reacting to her moves, but stepping into his own. I am going to decide what they do not know yet, he said. Claire held his eyes for a long second, then looked back at the screen as Daniel reached for another document, one that had not yet been revealed. The timer on the tablet dropped to 1 minute. The cafe noise faded into the background of something much larger, now unfolding in real time. Ethan's phone vibrated again, but this time he answered it without looking away from the screen. Yes, he said. A voice on the other end spoke quickly. The escrow file has been accessed. Ethan's expression changed just enough to register the impact. He ended the call slowly and looked back at Claire. That was the second copy, he said. Claire's voice dropped. Then someone is about to control all of it. Ethan's gaze returned to the screen, where Daniel placed his hand on the final document, preparing to slide it forward. And for the first time, Ethan realized the next move would not just reveal the truth, it would decide who owned it. The moment Daniel's hand touched the final document, the live feed glitched. Just for a fraction of a second. Then the image stabilized again, but something had changed. The document in front of him was no longer the same one Ethan had expected. Ethan leaned forward sharply, his eyes locking onto the screen. That is not his file, Ethan said. Claire followed his gaze, her expression tightening. No, she replied. That is not the disclosure he prepared. The regulator across the table noticed the shift immediately. She paused, her pen hovering above her notes. Mr. Brooks, she said, her tone firm, this document does not match the preliminary summary you submitted. Daniel froze for a fraction of a second. Then he recovered, forcing a composed smile. There must be a versioning issue, he said. Ethan let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. Versioning, he repeated under his breath. Claire's eyes flicked toward him. You recognize it, she said. Ethan nodded once. I do. He leaned closer to the screen. The document Daniel had placed forward now displayed a header Ethan knew intimately. Internal Oversight Archive. Not Caldwell Capital. Not legal. Oversight. That was Claire's domain. Daniel flipped the first page, clearly not expecting what he saw. His expression shifted. Subtle. Controlled. But unmistakable. He turned the page again, faster this time. The regulator leaned forward. Mr. Brooks, I need you to explain this, she said. Daniel did not answer immediately. Ethan's voice dropped, precise and certain. That is the third copy, he said. Claire's breath caught, just slightly. No, she said. The escrow file was sealed. Ethan shook his head once. Not anymore. On the screen, the regulator reached across the table and pulled the document closer. She scanned the first page, then the second. Her posture changed. More rigid. More focused. This is not a partial disclosure, she said. This is a full internal audit trail. Daniel leaned back slightly, his composure slipping for the first time. That is not what I submitted, he said. The regulator looked up at him. It is what you just handed me, she replied. Ethan felt the shift land completely. This was no longer controlled negotiation. This was exposure with evidence attached. He glanced at Claire. Someone replaced it, he said. Claire's eyes remained fixed on the screen. Not replaced, she said slowly. Activated. Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time, he answered immediately, his voice low. Say it. The voice on the other end did not hesitate. The escrow account was accessed remotely. Full file transfer completed. Timestamp matches the upload to your secure channel. Ethan's eyes flicked to the screen again. The timing aligned perfectly. The third copy had not just been opened. It had been distributed. He ended the call and looked back at Claire. Whoever did. This now holds all 3 points, he said. Claire shook her head slightly. No, she replied. If they distributed it, then they do not want to hold it. They want it seen. That changed the direction entirely. Ethan leaned back, his mind recalculating its speed. On the screen, the regulator flipped to the final page of the document. She stopped. Her eyes narrowed. Then she read aloud. Authorization override. Signed. Ethan Caldwell. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Ethan did not react outwardly, but his focus sharpened to a single point. That signature was not just present. It was validated, attached to a digital timestamp and an internal override code that could not be forged without access. Claire looked at him slowly. That code, she said. Only you could generate that. Ethan nodded once. Yes. The regulator looked up at Daniel again, her voice colder now. This places direct authorization at the executive level, she said. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out immediately. For the first time, he had nothing prepared. Ethan watched the screen, then spoke quietly to Claire. That is not the signature they expected to find, he said. Claire's eyes moved back to him. What do you mean? Ethan held her gaze, calm, controlled, but now with something else underneath. Intention. It is mine, he said, but I did not sign that version. Claire's expression shifted, understanding beginning to form. You are saying there is another layer, she said. Ethan nodded slowly. Yes. And whoever just released this knows exactly where it leads. On the screen, the regulator closed the folder with deliberate care. Mr. Brooks, she said, this inquiry is no longer preliminary. Daniel's face tightened. Ethan exhaled once, then looked back at Claire. The balance had changed again, but not in the way she had planned. This is not your system anymore, he said. Claire did not argue. She was already looking at the implications. Ethan's phone buzzed one more time. A new message. No sender. Just a single line. Check the origin code. Ethan stared at the screen for a long second. Then he looked back at Claire. If the origin code matches what I think it does, he said, then this was never about exposing me. Claire's voice dropped. Then what is it about? Ethan's eyes returned to the live feed, where the regulator was already calling. For additional records. He answered without hesitation. It is about proving who actually built the system in the first place. Ethan did not look at the screen anymore. The regulator's voice faded into the background. Daniel's silence no longer mattered. The numbers, the codes, the documents that once defined his world felt distant for the first time in years. His hand rested on the edge of the table, fingers still, but not steady. Claire watched him carefully, sensing the shift before he spoke. You built this system, he said quietly. Claire did not answer right away. He continued, his voice lower now, less controlled, more human. And I used it to erase you. The words did not land like an accusation. They landed like a memory. Ethan's eyes drifted for a second, not to the screen, not to the documents, but somewhere else entirely. A different room. Smaller. 10 years ago. Claire standing across from him, younger, holding a folder in both hands, her voice firm but not confrontational. This is not an error, she had said. This is deliberate. Ethan remembered the way he had leaned back in his chair, the weight of deadlines pressing on him, the board expecting results, the deal too important to risk. He remembered not looking at her for long, just long enough to decide. You crossed a line, he had told her. That is not your call to make. Claire had not raised her voice. She had not argued. She had just stood there for a second longer than expected, as if waiting for something else from him. Something he never gave. Then she nodded once, quietly, and walked out of the room. That was the moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just final. Back in the cafe, Ethan's fingers curled slightly against the table. His breath slowed, but not with control. With weight. Claire's voice broke the silence gently. You remember, she said. Ethan nodded once. Yes. He looked up at her now, not as an opponent, not as a variable to solve, but as the person he had dismissed when it mattered most. I thought I was protecting the company, he said. Claire held his gaze. You were protecting control, she replied. Ethan did not argue. For the first time, he did not need to. His phone was still in his hand. The file still open. The evidence still unfolding. But none of it felt as immediate as the space between them. He swallowed once, then spoke, his voice quieter than before. I should have listened. Claire's expression softened, but only slightly. Not with relief. With recognition. Ethan exhaled, then looked down at his phone again. His thumb hovered over the screen, not over a file this time, but over a contact he had not touched in years. Claire Bennett. He hesitated. Just for a second. Then he pressed call. The phone rang once. Twice. Claire's own phone, resting on the table beside her cup, began to vibrate softly. She looked down at it, then back at him. Ethan's hand trembled slightly, almost imperceptible, but real. When she answered, he did not speak immediately. The The silence carried more than any prepared sentence could. Then his voice came, unsteady but clear. I was wrong. Claire closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if the words had weight she had carried for years. When she opened them again, they were steady, but no longer distant. Ethan continued, the words coming slower now, each one chosen, each one real. I saw the risk. I saw what you found, and I chose to ignore it because it was inconvenient. His voice caught slightly, just enough to break the rhythm he had maintained for so long. I chose the outcome I wanted over the truth you showed me. Claire listened without interrupting. Around them, the cafe continued as if nothing had changed. But at that table, everything had. Ethan's grip tightened slightly on the phone, then loosened again. If I had made a different call that day, he said, none of this would be happening now. Claire's voice was quiet when she finally spoke. No, she said. It would still be happening. You just would have been on the right side of it. Ethan let that settle. A single breath. Then another. His eyes lowered for a moment, and when he looked back up, there was something new there. Not control. Not calculation. Something closer to acceptance. Tell me what I need to do now, he said. Claire watched him carefully, measuring not his words, but the space between them. The hesitation. The honesty. The absence of defense. The timer on the tablet reached 0. Somewhere, the release had gone live. But neither of them looked at it. Claire leaned forward slightly, her voice calm, but no longer distant. If you are asking that now, she said, then you already know the answer. Ethan nodded slowly. Yes, he did. He reached for the tablet, then stopped. Instead, he pushed it gently toward her. You lead this part, he said. Claire looked at the gesture, then back at him. The balance had shifted again. Not through force, not through leverage, through choice. And for the first time, the next move did not belong to the system they had built. It belonged to what they were willing to become after it. Ethan did not touch the tablet again. The news had already broken. The system they built had already moved beyond them. He stood slowly from the chair, his movements steady but no longer driven by control. Claire watched him, then followed, not as an opponent anymore, but as someone who had finally been seen. Outside, the late afternoon light had softened into early evening. The city moved as it always did, unaware that something quiet and irreversible had just shifted. Ethan stepped onto the sidewalk and paused. For a moment, he did not speak. He simply looked ahead, as if measuring the distance between who he had been and who he was choosing to become. Then he exhaled and turned. Come with me, he said. Claire studied him for a second, then nodded. They walked in silence, side by side, past glass buildings and passing cars, until the street noise gave way to something quieter. A hospital stood at the corner, its lights already on, its doors opening and closing with a steady rhythm of life continuing. Claire slowed slightly. Ethan did not. He pushed through the glass doors and stepped inside. The air changed immediately. Cleaner, colder, real. A nurse at the front desk looked up. Mr. Caldwell, she said, recognizing him. He nodded once, then looked toward the hallway without asking for directions. Claire followed him, her steps quieter now. They reached a room at the end of the corridor. Ethan stopped at the door, his hand resting against the frame. For the first time, hesitation returned. Not from fear, from weight. He pushed the door open. Inside, the room was dim. A monitor hummed softly. A woman sat in a chair by the bed, her posture tired but still. When she looked up and saw him, she froze. Emily, his wife. Her eyes widened, then filled before she even stood. Ethan stepped forward, but slower now, as if each step carried something he could not rush through. I should have come sooner, he said, his voice breaking just enough to reveal what he had held back for years. Emily did not speak at first. She stood, her hands trembling slightly, then crossed the distance between them in 2 quick steps and wrapped her arms around him. The impact of the embrace was immediate. Tight, real. Her fingers pressed into his back as if she needed to confirm he was actually there. Ethan's arms came up around her, slower, then tighter, holding on in a way he had not allowed himself before. I thought you chose everything else over us, she whispered, her voice shaking against his shoulder. Ethan closed his eyes, his breath uneven now. I did, he admitted, and I was wrong. Emily pulled back just enough to look at him, her hands still gripping his jacket. Tears ran freely down her face, but there was no anger left in her eyes. Only exhaustion, and something softer beneath it. He reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek with a hand that was no longer steady. "I am here now," he said quietly, "and I am not leaving." Behind them, Claire stood near the doorway, silent, her presence unnoticed but understood. She did not step forward. She did not interrupt. She simply watched, then gave a small, almost invisible nod before turning away, leaving the room without a sound. Inside, Ethan and Emily held on to each other as if time had finally slowed enough to let them feel what had been lost. The monitor continued its steady rhythm. The city continued outside. But in that room, something else had taken its place. Something quieter. Something stronger. Emily rested her forehead against his, her voice soft but certain. "Then stay," she said, "and this time mean it." Ethan nodded, his grip tightening just slightly as he held her closer. "I will," he answered. And for the first time, it was not a promise made for control. It was a promise made to remain.